Looking back, do you recognize the subtle hints from your younger years that signaled a deeper awareness? Many of us grew up feeling distinctly separate, sensing currents of reality that our peers seemed oblivious to entirely. These weren't mere personality traits, they were the early stirrings of a conscious spirit beginning to rouse. Today, we'll explore 5 childhood indicators that suggest you were already walking an awakened path. Already hearing the symphony that most never perceive. The first indicator is your profound emotional receptivity. Were you the youngster who felt sorrow seeing a fallen leaf? Who avoided certain stories because their emotional weight lingered for weeks? Who could sense the atmosphere of a space upon entering, like dipping a hand into water and knowing its temperature instantly? Other children appeared to move through life lightly. They laughed, they played, they moved forward. But you absorbed the world. A critical comment didn't just momentarily hurt. It took residence within you. You contemplated it. You carried it in your body like a physical burden. When adults were tense, even quietly, you perceived that friction like a change in air pressure. You couldn't articulate it, but you knew this wasn't a flaw, though you were likely told to build thicker skin, to be less affected. This was actually your receiver, your instrument for detecting frequencies others ignored. The awakened spirit doesn't construct heavy fortifications. It maintains permeable boundaries. And yes, this means you experience pain more intensely. But it also means you experience wonder more intensely. You experience authenticity more intensely. Most people navigate existence with their dials turned low. They must, or the cacophony would be overwhelming. But you arrived with the volume at maximum. You couldn't adjust it. This was your inherent calibration. And while it complicated youth, it also meant you were learning to interpret life at a depth many never reach. Consider this analogy. A painter with perfect color vision sees every hue, every subtle shade. To someone without that capacity, the painting looks acceptable either way. But the painter knows they perceive what's discordant. They perceive what's exquisite. They cannot not perceive it. You were born with something akin to perfect pitch for feeling, for essence, for the hidden layers of human existence. So if you were that deeply feeling child, the one who experienced too much, understand this: you weren't malfunctioning. You were conscious, or at least you were becoming conscious. The world attempted to teach you to close down, to erect barriers, to feel less, but some part of you resisted. And that resistance, that determination to remain receptive even when it ached, that was the signal. The second indicator is that you posed questions that stopped others in their tracks. Do you recall being in a classroom or at a family gathering and suddenly wondering, but what is the reason for this? Who created this structure? Is there another possibility? Perhaps you voiced these inquiries and received puzzled stares. Perhaps elders instructed you to be silent, to stop challenging things, to simply accept the status quo. Or perhaps you learned rapidly to internalize the questions, to outwardly conform while internally your mind raced with uncertainties and wonders that nobody else appeared to share. Other children wanted to know the mechanics of things. You wanted to know their purpose and origin. Other children accepted the game's rules. You wanted to know who wrote the rules and if the rules were even sensible. This wasn't defiance for its own sake. This was authentic inquiry. You observed the world and it seemed inconsistent. People declared one thing and demonstrated another. They followed rituals without comprehending them. They normalized struggle. They pursued objectives that felt empty. And you, even as a child, detected a fundamental misalignment in it all. The awakened spirit is born with a kind of universal curiosity, not negativity, but curiosity, a desire to investigate, to look behind the facade, to not accept the superficial narrative as the entire story. Most individuals never cultivate this. They receive the script they are given and perform their part until the show concludes. But you could not. Something within you kept murmuring. There is greater depth here. Look deeper. Don't accept all that you hear. Maybe you inquired about mortality and what follows. Maybe you inquired about divinity and why humans conflict over it. Maybe you inquired about justice and why imbalance persists. Maybe you inquired about the purpose of it all, the significance, the reason for our being. These are not immature questions. These are the most ancient inquiries, the most profound inquiries, the inquiries that philosophers and seekers have contemplated for millennia. And you were posing them at age 6 or 9 or 12. Why? Because your essence was already looking past the surface play. It was already sensing that the conventional answers were inadequate. The third indicator is that you cherished solitude and actively sought it. Were you the child who drifted away to watch clouds while others played ball? The one who could lose hours in your space with your journals or your music or simply your own company? The one who didn't constantly require companionship? Who sometimes preferred the peaceful dialogue with your own mind? It isn't that you were unfriendly. You could engage with others. You could share joy and participate in groups. But something in you also thirsted for aloneness. You required it like you required nourishment. Excessive time with people depleted you. Too much stimulation, too much conversation, too much trivial exchange, and you began to feel untethered, dispersed, as if you were forgetting something vital. Other children seemed to dread being by themselves. They needed the collective. They needed the affirmation, the diversion, the constant input. But you journeyed inward. You discovered something there in the quiet that the external world couldn't provide. Perhaps you named it reflection. Perhaps you named it dreaming. Perhaps you gave it no name at all. You simply knew that when you sat in stillness, when you let the external world soften, something else surfaced. A calm, a knowing, a sense that you were more than just your identity and your physical form and your situation. The awakened spirit demands solitude. Not perpetually, but consistently, like a spring that requires time to replenish. You were already practicing this as a child, though no one instructed you. You were already learning to attend to the voice that doesn't yell, the voice that only speaks when all else grows silent. People may have been concerned about you. They may have said you were too isolated, too reserved, too immersed in your inner universe. But you weren't adrift in your own world. You were discovered there. You were uncovering that the most fascinating realm wasn't out there in the sports field or the cinema or the internet. It was in here, in the boundless interior landscape of your own perception. This is what contemplation teachers dedicate years to imparting. The skill of being solitary without feeling lonely. The skill of resting in stillness without growing restless. The skill of discovering abundance in silence. You found this naturally as a child. And while it may have made you seem peculiar to others, it was actually evidence of significant spiritual development. You were, remarkably, already learning to companion yourself, to heed your own inner voice, to trust the internal quiet more than the external din. The fourth indicator is that you detected insincerity and struggled to participate. Did you ever observe people being untrue and wonder why others didn't perceive it? Not major falsehoods, the minor ones, the social ones, the polite deceptions. A relative being kind to someone they had just criticized. A friend pretending enthusiasm for an activity they disliked. A classmate agreeing with a popular opinion they didn't believe. Other children might not have registered or minded. But you registered. You saw the performance and you saw the truth behind it, and it disturbed you. It felt incorrect. It felt like everyone was participating in a charade and pretending the charade was actual life. Maybe you attempted to mention it occasionally, but you received the reaction. The reaction that communicated, quiet. We don't acknowledge these things. This is simply how society functions. But something in you opposed. Something in you couldn't counterfeit it. Couldn't participate. Couldn't wear the social mask as effortlessly as others seemed to. In social situations, you felt uncomfortable, unable to engage in conversation that felt meaningless. At community events, you felt like an observer at a play. Everyone knew their part, everyone delivered their lines, and you were expected to perform yours, but you couldn't quite manage it. For when you did, it felt draining, like wearing a costume that doesn't fit. The awakened spirit possesses a very limited capacity for artificiality. It recognizes the performance and cannot unrecognize it. This doesn't render you superior. It doesn't make you more virtuous. It simply indicates you're functioning at a different wavelength. You're perceiving the truth beneath the appearance. And once you perceive it, you cannot return to pretending you don't. This is the story of the invisible cloth. Everyone consenting to see what isn't present because consent is simpler than truth. But you were the child who couldn't consent. Not because you wished to be troublesome, but because your vision operated differently. You saw what was truly there. And what was truly there frequently differed from what people claimed was there. As you matured, you likely learned to manage this more skillfully. You learned to play the role when needed, to smile politely, to keep your perceptions private, but you never forgot. You never ceased seeing. And that sight, that incapacity to be fully deceived by the surface narrative, that was an indicator of your awakening. The fifth indicator is that you experienced a mysterious longing for an unknown home. This is perhaps the most peculiar indicator, and yet many awakened spirits will immediately identify with it. Did you ever feel as a child a certain yearning not for anything concrete? Not for a possession or a vacation or a person, but for something indefinable. A sensation that you were distant from home even when sitting in your familiar bedroom. A sensation that you belonged elsewhere, somewhere you couldn't quite recall or describe. Some children experience this as a melancholy. Others experience it as an agitation, a sense that this reality, this existence, this ordinary life isn't entirely correct. Not bad precisely, just not whole. Like you're anticipating something. Like you're meant to be in another place, engaged in another purpose, expressing another aspect of being. You might have gazed at the moon and felt it. You might have walked in a forest and felt it. You might have been surrounded by people and suddenly felt it envelop you. This ache. This strange remembrance of something you've never encountered, at least not in this lifetime. The reality is the awakened spirit recalls, not necessarily in clear thoughts or pictures, but somewhere in its depths it recalls that it is not solely this form, this name, this personal history. It recalls that it originated from something vaster, something boundless, something that this conventional life only partially reflects. And thus there exists this persistent subtle homesickness, this yearning to reunite with the origin, to remember completely, to awaken fully. Other children don't feel this because they are not yet perceiving the space between what they truly are and what they seem to be. They take the world as presented. They accept that this is all there is and they accommodate themselves to it. But you couldn't accommodate, not entirely. Something in you remained unaccommodated, remained alert, remained cognizant that there is more. This is not despondency, though it can be confused for it. This is spiritual recollection. The spirit remembering itself. And if you felt this as a child, that mysterious longing for nowhere specific, that yearning for something nameless, then you were already awakening, already perceiving that life extends beyond the visible, already knowing in some pre-verbal way that you are not merely an individual living a life. You are awareness itself, temporarily inhabiting the character of an individual. Your strangeness was not a flaw, but a remembering that so what is the significance? Here we are. 5 indicators. Deep feeling, asking fundamental questions, craving solitude, seeing true nature, longing for origin. If even one or two of these echo your early years, it's likely you were already an awakened spirit, or at least a spirit in the process of awakening. But what does this imply for you now? Well, it implies several things. First, it means your childhood wasn't an error. All that peculiarity, all that receptivity, all that feeling distinct and unplaced, it wasn't a defect. It was a design. You were perceiving realities that most people never detect. You were seeing what most people never see. And yes, this made development more challenging, but it also made you genuine in a way that many never achieve. Second, it means you have a role, not a weight. A role exists because the world needs individuals who can feel profoundly, who can ask essential questions, who can dwell in quiet, who can perceive beyond illusion, who can recall that we are more than these physical forms and these personal narratives. The world is saturated with noise and superficiality and diversion. And you, with your particular mode of existence, you are a remedy. You are an answer to the unconscious living. Third, it means you can cease pretending now. If you spent your youth striving to resemble others, striving to belong, striving to numb your sensitivity or silence your questions or conceal your need for aloneness, you can desist now. You can acknowledge that you were designed differently. Not superior, not inferior, differently. And that distinction is precisely what you're intended to contribute to this world. The awakened spirit isn't awakened because it's unique. It's awakened because it couldn't remain asleep. It attempted to slumber like everyone else. But something kept prodding it, urging it, speaking to its core, and finally it opened its eyes and realized, oh, I've been conscious this entire time. I merely believed I was supposed to be unconscious. If you were that child, the one who felt too deeply, questioned too fundamentally, needed quiet too much, saw too clearly, yearned too mysteriously, then you were already conscious. Perhaps you didn't know how to name it. Perhaps you tried to disregard it or repress it or eliminate it, but it didn't vanish, did it? Because it isn't something you can remove. It is what you are, and now reflecting back, you can see that those indicators were not issues to be resolved. They were summons. Summons to trust your own experience, to honor your own awareness, to stop pretending you're something you're not. The point isn't to become someone else, but to be what you are. Life's purpose is simply to be living. It is so clear and so apparent and so straightforward. Yet everyone hurries about in a great frenzy as if they must accomplish something beyond their own being. But the awakened spirit understands this innately. Even as a child, it understood. It didn't require teaching. It just knew, somewhere in its foundation, that the goal isn't to arrive somewhere else or transform into someone else. The goal is to be present, to be conscious, to be attentive to this strange and beautiful and difficult and miraculous fact of being. So if these indicators belong to you, if you see yourself in these patterns, then welcome. Welcome to an existence of being more aware than the surrounding culture generally encourages. Welcome to an existence of perceiving what others overlook and experiencing what others evade. Welcome to an existence of posing inquiries that lack simple answers and finding solace in silence when everyone else is clamoring. You are not damaged. You never were. You were simply conscious in a world that's largely unconscious. And the world needs you to remain conscious. Not to judge those who are sleeping. Not to feel separate or superior, but simply to be what you are. To be the one who feels, who inquires, who sits in stillness, who sees authentically, who remembers origin. That's what an awakened spirit does. It doesn't attempt to rouse others by coercion. It simply lives consciously. And in doing so, it offers authorization for others to awaken too. Merely by being itself. Merely by refusing to pretend. Merely by staying open when everything else is shutting down. You've been doing this since you were a child. You just lacked the vocabulary for it. Now you possess it. Now you can look back and recognize that your unusual childhood wasn't an error. It was the commencement of something, and that something is still unfolding, still evolving, still awakening more and more with each new day. So continue feeling, continue questioning, continue finding your quiet, continue seeing, continue longing for home, because that longing is what maintains your consciousness. And your consciousness is an offering to this sleeping world. If this exploration resonated with you, please support this channel by giving it a like and subscribe to Winds of Thought for more journeys into understanding.